Konnichiwa minasan, and welcome to the class in the second lecture series on Introduction to Japanese Language and Culture. So, in our last class we did permission, how to ask and how to give permission, and also a lot of other things. We also did some phrases over there, and here also we will do some phrases where we will see how to say I don't mind anything, anything is all right, anywhere is all right, and anyone is all right. So, let us see what we have in our kaiwa today, and then I will do the explanation. It is a simple kaiwa between Mira-san and Tanaka-san, and they are at the restaurant, and let us see what they are doing.
Tanaka-san, onaka suita kara nani ka tabemashou ka?
何を食べますか？
今朝から何も食べてないので何でもいいです。
ああ、そう。じゃあバーガーを食べましょ
う。レストランで。
すみません、バーガー2つお願いします。
申し訳ありません。バーガーはもう売り切れました。
ああ、そう。すぐできるものは？
焼きそばとうどんがすぐできます。
皆さんどうする？
私は焼きそばもうどんも好きですので、どっちでもいいです。
じゃあバーガー2つとコーヒー2つお願いします。
以上でよろしいですか？
はい、どうも。
So, well, you just heard the kaiwa, and I am sure quite a bit of it is already clear to you. So, whatever is new I will just explain. So, Tanaka-san, onaka suita kara nani ka tabemashou ka? Something. Tabemashou ka? Shall we eat something? Onaka suita. It is empty. Onaka is stomach, is empty, that I am hungry, meaning is I am hungry. Nani o tabemasu ka? So, what would you like to have? Kesa kara nani mo tabete nai node. Kesa is today morning kara, from today morning, nani mo, nothing, tabete nai node. Kara and node both mean exactly the same thing, but with node the listener understands that this is a genuine reason. Nandemo ii desu, anything is all right. Ah, so, ja burger o tabemashou, burger o tabemashou. So, Tanaka decides for Mira also, as she has said, nandemo ii desu, anything is all right. Why? Because onaka suite imasu, I am very, very hungry. So, now they go to a restaurant, and what happens then? Sumimasen, burger futatsu onegai shimasu. So, burger is a thing, tabemono something small, so futatsu. You have done this, hitotsu, futatsu, mitsu, yotsu, and it goes on till 10, and from 10 onwards it is 11個, 12個, 13個. So, the counter for small irregular objects is tsu or ko, and you have to add it to the number. Moshiwake arimasen, we also did moshiwake arimasen, where you are very, very apologetic about something that you have done or committed. You can just say sumimasen, general sorry, gomenasai, used with juniors or in informal situations. Sumimasen is more formal at offices, at restaurants, and then moshiwake arimasen can be used anywhere when you are extremely apologetic of what you have done. Baga wa mo urikiremashita, that is, it is already finished. So, as a restaurant, as a waiter who has been asked to get burger, or the order is for burger, and he says to the guest that I am sorry, it has finished. So, that is something really very, very shitsure. So, Moshiwake arimasen. My sincere apologies. Tanaka takes it very casually and says, oh, so. Okay, so sugu dekiru mono wa, sugu is quickly, immediately. Dekiru mono is can be done, or in this case made. Sugu dekiru mono. Mono is thing wa. Yakisoba to udon ga sugu dekimasu. Yakisoba is just like noodles, and udon is thick noodles in soup. Ga sugu dekimasu. Why ga over here? Because of dekimasu. Mira-san dou suru? What do you want to do? Watashi wa yakisoba mo udon mo A mo B mo. It's coming again and again. I keep reminding you. So use it in sentences and you will be more comfortable when you are doing conversation. Watashi wa yakisoba mo udon mo suki desu node. Because I like both, dochi demo ii desu. So over here, dochi demo can also be done later. Ii desu. じゃあ焼きそば2つね。バーガーは売り切れですから。焼きそば。焼きそば2つとコーヒー2つお願いします。Please get it for us. 以上でよろしいですか? So we'll do this expression today, and どうも Tanaka-san says just a casual どうも and not どうもありがとうございました. This phrase will be used by the waitress. So now let us see what we have in the kanji section. Well, there are a number of kanjis. I may not do all today, but some definitely I will take up. One of them is urikire. Urikire. Uri is like this, small, not like doyobi. Please remember, and like this, and uri, urimas or uru, and kuru is like this, kuru. So uru and kuru, uri kire, which is finished. It has been sold out. So one kanji you can do this. Tabemasu you have already done. Kesa is something that you should know. This is ima. And kesa, very very simple, nichi, and then another plus over here and tsuki. So kesa, k and sa. And then there are other kanjis which we are going to do in our lesson. We will cover all the ones that are left over here sometime later. Now in lesson 26, we learnt how to use mo, which is already, and sugu, which means soon. We also joined the two adverbs and learned to use them in different situations. When these two adverbs are joined together, it has the meaning that the action is for future, not immediate future, but well sometime in the future. As it is relative, it depends on context. So let us see how it is used. There are a lot of examples for you today. So now we have sugu and mosugu. What is the difference? So you will see over here, sugu yarimasu. Shigoto o shimashita ka? Ka sugu yarimasu. So immediately I will do it. Sugu yarinasai. So this is an order, nasai form, verb, and nasai is a command from someone senior to you. So sugu yarinasai, sugu tabenasai, sugu ikinasai, sugu yamenasai. So all of this will be commands. And what does this show? This shows time. Sugu yarimasu, immediately, within a minute. Sugu shukudai o shinasai. Immediately do your homework. So it's a direct order. You never do this, never use this form with seniors. Not allowed in formal situations to people older to you in rank and in age. Keep that in mind. Shinasai is an order to be given to people younger to you. Basically, this is a classroom expression, or at home mothers would generally tell their children, or in the offices where the boss is ordering the young staff or junior staff. So, this is related with time, all three. Now, you have done mo, which is already mo rokuji desu. Mo ikimashita ka? Has he already left? So, if we join the two over here, then what happens? Mo class o hajimemasu. That is mo sugu. Not immediately, but well, as we are talking about class. So, you cannot say after 3 hours or 4 hours, meaning maybe in 15 or 20 minutes. Mo sugu class o hajimemasu. Then mo sugu hajimeta hogai. It's better that you start the class soon. The meaning is soon and not immediately. So, it's very clear from here that it's relative. Depending on what you are talking about, the soon will be decided. Now, look at these sentences. Byoin wa eki no sugu mae desu. Sugu mae desu is right in front or immediately in front. This has to do with location and not time. Now, uchi wa sugu soko desu. It's right over there, just a little further. So, right there, meaning very close. Then we have kosate no magatte uchi wa sugu hidari desu. It's immediately on the left side. So, here it is all about location, all about distance. This is about time, this is about, well, very soon. See, it is about distance, about location. Now, there are a few kanjis for you. You have done these kanjis, I am just revising them. Hidari, this had come in your sentence earlier. So, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Hidari means left. Then migi. Migi is like this. Migi. Hidari. And then it is very similar to this character, which is ishi. And you have done a kotowaza also with this, which is isseki nicho. Seki is another reading for ishi. Then we have eki. Now, it is not very clear. I will make it for you so that it becomes clear. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 and 14. Now, I think it is very clear. I have made it clearly for you. It is eki. It is a 14 stroke character. Eki. Eki no mae desu. Then hajimeru. You have done this character onna. This is mu, katakana mu, and then kuchi. So, with this you make hajimeru or hajimaru to start. These kanjis are important because they are for N4 and N5. So, if you are appearing for N4 and N5, then you need to remember these kanjis. Now, there is practice for you. Ichijikan mae ni, earlier, mail o okutta kara, I have sent, okuru. Mo sugu henji ga kuru, very and soon. So, this does not mean that Henji is going to come or the answer is going to come or the mail is going to come in 10-15 minutes. Well, they have just sent the mail. So, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe after 2 hours, maybe after 10 hours, but not very late. Mo sugu kuru, very soon kuru. Now, ichiji kan, you have already done this kanji and I will do it with you as well just now. Okutta is one kanji that I would like to do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, and this means road or continuous. It is going forward. So, okutta kara, I have sent it forward, meaning sent. Taxi o yonda kara, I have called. Shinpai shinai de ne, mo sugu kuru yo, mo sugu, very soon kuru. Ki mas, I just made kuru over there. So, once again kuru. Shinpai we will do just now. There is yomu. I have done yomu, but very quickly. Urimasu you did just now. So, yomu. You to speak and to sell. You read and you sell. So, yomu. Then, ame ga mou sugu yamu kara shinpai shinai de ne. Yamu. Yamu is to stop. So, ame will stop very soon. Please do not worry. Mou sugu. Then, osoi kara sugu hajimeta hou ga ii. It is already very late. Sugu hajimeta hou ga ii. So, it is not mo sugu, sugu, meaning very quickly, immediately hajimeta hou ga ii. So, I am sure you can now figure out mo sugu and sugu. Sugu means right now. In another 2, 3, 5 minutes. Now, we have kanji and I have also written some sentences for you. They are in the script. So, try to read them at home. I will read them once over here. 1時間前にタクシーを呼びました。So, 1時間前 1 hour back 1時間前にタクシーを呼びました。You can see the kanji also for 1時間 Then shinpai. This character you have done kokoro. So, well, add kokoro. There is another reading for kokoro which is shin, and how do you write pai? Like this, pai, shim pai. So, shim pai, not to worry. Then there is daijobu also, dai, jo and bu. Then daijobu desu kara shinpai shinai de ne. Then oame de uchi ga taore mashita. Lot of rain. Ame is like this, ame. Then hajimeru. Watashi wa atarashi shoubai o hajimemashita. We just did hajimeru. Then this is koko ni kuruma o tomenai de kudasai. Tomeru, to stop. So, tomeru is like this. To, me and ru. Tomeru. Then there is another very simple one, that is why I have put it over here. Just add one more line and you get tadashi. Tadashi. Tadashi means correct. It is right. So, Watashi no hou kara kare wa tadashi desu. Watashi no hou kara miru to kare wa tadashi desu. If you see from my side, he is absolutely correct. So, read this at home. I will not give you the Roman and see if you can read it now. Now, in the kaiwa there was a word nanika, which means something, and dareka, which means someone. Now, we have done nanika last week with nanimo. These words are pronouns, and besides these two we will also learn some new ones as well. So, with nanio the speaker is asking your preference or your choice. He knows that B wants something, it is just a polite inquiry. But with nanika, the speaker A does not know if the listener B wants something or not. Now, you can read all this and I am sure you will understand. Nanika we have already done. So, the important thing over here is that particle O may or may not be used with nanika. It is not that important, and the ka over here that we have is not a question particle. The question particle comes at the end. Now, you have sentences. Nani o tabemasu ka? What will you have? Over here, the listener is asking choice, as I just told you, whereas nanika tabemasu ka? The speaker is asking for choice, A or B or what. But in nanika, the speaker does not know whether the listener wants anything in the first place or not. So, the meaning is, will you have something? Nanika tabemasu ka? And also it is a very direct question, generally used amongst friends and not with seniors. With seniors, you name the object, kohi wa ikaga desu ka or kocha wa ikaga desu ka. Now, you see over here, Tanaka-san nani o nomimasu ka? What will you have? As I just told you, what would you like to have? Watashi wa kocha o nomimasu, a direct answer, direct question, direct answer. Tanaka-san nani ka nomimasu ka? Intonation is rising. Also, you will see that O is mentioned over here. You may or may not add O. Either ways it is all right. Tanaka-san nani ka nomimasu ka? So, will you have something? Kocha o nomimasu. Ja. In that case, well then, kocha o nomimasu or kocha o nomimasho. Let us have kocha. As you can see, do you want something? So, you will not ask your seniors, do you want something? Now, if you want to say that I do not want to have anything, then what will you say? Nani mo. Nani mo is used with negative verbs, meaning nothing. How will you do that? Tanaka-san nani o nomimasu ka? So, Tanaka-san can say, watashi wa kocha o nomimasu, as was there in the last slide. If he does not want to have anything, then nani mo nomimasen. I do not want to have anything. So, basically, do not want to, whatever the verb is saying. Nani mo kaimasen. Kaimasen. Nani mo tabemasen. Nani mo shimasen. So, any verb you can use over here. Of course, it should have meaning. Then will have nothing, as you can see, or will do nothing. Nani ka arimasu ka? Now, this is a very interesting situation where maybe you have gone to meet your professor and or somebody, and you are looking very unhappy, and the person may ask, Nani ka arimasu ka? What is the matter? Or if you go to your sensei, he would say, Nani ka arimasu ka? Why have you come? Do you want to ask me something? So, nani ka. Depending on situation. Then maybe you have lost something and you are looking for it. So, nanika arimasu ka? Are you looking for something? What is the matter? Or maybe you are looking somewhere and somebody says nanika arimasu ka? Is there something which should not be there? Okay. So, nanika arimasu ka? You can see, is something there? You are finding something. Is there a problem? You are looking worried. Do you want to tell me something? You go to your teacher and you look worried. What is the matter? Any of these could be used with nanika arimasu ka? And nanika arimashita ka? Well, everything in the past. Was there a problem, or what were you looking for, or did you want to tell me something? Any of this could be used or could be the meaning depending on situation. It is given over here, you can go over it. Then if there is nothing, say there is no problem, you have just gone there to visit. So, you can always say nanimo nai, which is informal. If it is your teacher, then you can say nanimo arimasen, which will make it polite. And then you have to add sensei before that. Sensei nanimo arimasen, daijobu desu. It is absolutely all right. There is nothing or just nothing. Nanika arimasu ka? You are finding something, nothing, there is nothing, nanimo nai. Now, how will you say that everything is fine or anything is all right? So, in our kaiwa, Meera says that I will have anything, I am very hungry. So, you order and I will have anything that you order. That is the meaning in the kaiwa. So, you will see that this word nandemo is used with positive verbs. The meaning is positive, which is anything or everything is fine. Kesa kara nanimo tabete nai node nandemo ii desu. Anything is fine. This was the sentence. So, well, nandemo, verb plus positive form. Tanaka-san nani o nomimasu ka? Again the same question over here. So, nanimo nomanai. Nanimo nomanai. Negative. I will have nothing. But if you want to have something and you are not decided, then nandemo ii desu. Anything is fine. Now, nandemo tabemasu, nandemo nomimasu, nandemo shimasu, nandemo dekimasu. Can do anything. So, that is how you will use nandemo. And with nanimo, same thing, nanimo tabemasen, nanimo nomimasen, nanimo shimasen. Just remember it is in the negative. Now, there is a word similar to nandemo. Before I go any further, I want to tell you about that as well. It is nandomo, a very similar sounding word to nandemo. Nandemo is a phrase, whereas nandomo is an adverb. And it is very easy to mistake nandomo with nandemo, though the meanings are very, very different. And it is also very clear from the context, but yes, we sometimes do make a mistake. So, let us see what the question word nan plus domo, when they are joined together, what does it mean? It shows frequency, meaning often, is a counter used for occurrences of an action. Now, you can look at the examples. Nandomo yarimashita kedo dekimasen deshita. What does it mean? Meaning, I tried it a number of times. So, showing frequency that you did something a number of times, but dekimasen deshita, could not do it. Nandemo yarimashita kedo dekimasen deshita. Nandemo kiita kedo hatsuon wakarimasen deshita. So, number of times. Nandomo ikimasu. I go a number of times. Watashi wa nandomo Tokyo Disneyland ni itta koto ga arimasu. I have been to Disneyland a number of times. Watashi wa nandomo, many times. Tokyo Disneyland ni ikimashita. So, number of times a certain activity happens or many times it happens, then you will use nandomo. Now, there is something very interesting, there is this word domo, but please do not confuse it with domo, which means thank you, and domo over here is joined with nan, and then it shows number of times a certain activity is happening, and then nandemo, anything. So, they are very, very different, nandomo and nandemo and domo and domo. Nandomo, as we know, is an expression and nandomo is an adverb. Nankai is used for frequency, number of times a certain activity happens, and nandemo nai, which we are going to do now, means it is something very, very trivial, of no consequence. So, let us see. Nanika tabemasu ka? Again the same question. Nandemo ii desu. Anything is fine. Nandomo kaita kedo. I wrote it a number of times. Demo dekimasen deshita. Nandomo mita kedo. Kedo kanji no kakikata ga wakarimasen. Oboerare masen. Cannot remember, cannot write. Nandomo shacho ni atta koto ga aru. Many times I have met my president. Shacho is the president of the company. So, nandomo shacho ni atta koto ga arimasu. I have had the opportunity to meet him many times, number of times. Kare wa nandemo nai koto ni okorimashita. Nandemo nai. Kare wa he. Nandemo nai, meaning of no consequence. He scolded me for something which was not that important. Nandemo nai koto, a useless thing, something that is of no consequence. Nanika arimasu ka? Nandemo nai. There is nothing. Meaning is nothing over here. Of no consequence. Not important. Important. So, that is the difference. Depending on situation, it will change again. Nanika arimasu ka? Nani mo arimasen. Nanika arimasu ka? Iie, daijoubu desu. And nandemo nai. So, another way of answering this same question is, there is nothing. Is something over there? Nothing is there. Nanika arimasu ka? Do you have a problem? Nandemo nai. Everything is fine. I do not have a problem. Now, similarly, we also have dare, dareka, daredemo and dare nimo. Dare, of course, you know, is a question word meaning who. Dareka is someone. Daredemo, anybody. It's just got interchanged actually. So, anybody and nobody, no one. Dare nimo, negative, and daredemo ii desu, positive over here. Tanaka-san, kino dare ni aimashita ka? So, you have a lot of examples here as well. Dare ni aimashita ka? Whom did you meet? Ni over here is for aimasu. So, Yamada sensei ni aimashita. I met him. Now, over here, look at this very carefully. These two are talking about something and there is someone over here. So, 部屋に誰がいますか? So the presence of someone over here is known. That someone is inside, but we don't know who. So he is asking, 誰がいますか? Who is inside? Now, you have done this picture earlier. Gomen kudasai. Knock knock, is someone there? So now look at this one. There is no one inside. So, 部屋に誰かいますか is someone over there. So that's a question, is someone over there? So now we don't know at all who is inside or who is not inside. Just a simple inquiry, is someone inside? Is someone over there? 部屋に誰かいますか? So there is a big difference in the two. 部屋に誰がいますか? Who is over there? And is someone over there? In a similar manner, 誰が車の中にいますか? Or 誰が車, you can remove the 中にいますか? Who is in the car? 誰もいません. One answer is, there is no one. 誰か車の中にいますか? Is someone over there? The answer could be, I don't know, わかりません or 知りません。昨日うちに誰が来ましたか? Who came? 来ましたか? Who came? So, answer could be 田中さん came or お母さん came or 友達 came. 友達が来ました。お母さんが来ました or 先生が来ました。Now, if I say 誰か来ましたか? Did someone come? So, I can see there are 2 cups or maybe lot of cups in the kitchen, or I can see a bag, or I can see shoes or something, or maybe a glass of water. So, you come home and you ask, 誰か来ましたか? Did someone come? And similarly, you can see うちの裏に in the back side, back lawn of the uchi. 誰かいますよ. Someone is there at the back. So, 誰か and 誰が, see how they are used and use them in your sentences during conversation. 誰に会いましたか? So, whom did you meet? 先生に会いました。誰に会いたいですか? 先生に会いたいです。or 誰にも会いたくないです。誰にも just like 何も in negative 会いたくないです。No one. ムンバイに行ったときに誰に会いましたか? Whom did you meet? 誰にも会わなかった because past negative 会いませんでした。会いませんでした。plain form for past negative 行ったときに時 at that time when you went to Mumbai 何も食べたくないです。I don't want to eat anything. See, with 何も negative verb. Always remember that. So, 誰でも no matter who, anybody or whoever. 学生の中から誰が発表しますか? 誰が who is going to do 発表. 学生の中から誰もしません。誰でもいいです。Anybody is all right. Anybody is all right. But this is a very flippant kind of an expression which is to be used only with friends. 誰でもいいです。If your teacher asks you, 学生の中から誰が発表しますか? Will you say 誰でもいいです先生? It will be very very rude and direct and shitsure. So, 誰でも is to be used with friends only. 誰でもいいです。グループから誰が国際会議に行きますか? Bucho is asking. So, you can reply 私は行きます。 Dare demo ii desu. Again a little shitsure. Same thing over here. Dare demo ii desu. And dareka ikimasu ka? And wakaranai. These two are the same. Dare mo ii desu or dare demo ii desu. And you have practiced this enough. I think you can now answer this on your own. Minna kanojo o shitte imasu. Everybody knows kanojo. All. Minna means all. So, all know kanojo means they all know her. Dare demo. Anyone and everyone knows kanojo. They all know her very well. That is the difference in minna and dare demo. All know her and one and all know her. I have also done dare demo in lesson 25. So, you can go and look that up as well. Now, we have nani o tabemasu ka? As I told you, what will you have? Nani ka tabemasu ka? Will you have something? Then nani mo tabemasen, nothing, and then nandemo ii desu, anything is fine or everything is fine. And similarly for dare, dare ni aimasu ka? Whom? Dare ka ni aimasu ka? Someone. Will you meet someone? Dare ni mo aimasen, I will meet no one. And dare demo ii desu, anybody is fine. So, try to use these in your conversation and you will be very comfortable. There is one more group that I have to do, which I will do in your next lesson. Now, I had given this to you last time. This is Mimi, Te, we have done all of this, Ashi, Me. Now, other words I have written for you, I have purposely written in kanji. I want you to write in hiragana. Kuchi is there, densha, kuruma and hito. Some other words with these kanjis, try to learn them. Now, there was an expression, ijo de yoroshi desu ka? So, this means, is that all that you have to say? Yoroshi is E. Is that all? Is that much? Enough? So, generally used during meetings and once you are finishing the meeting and also mainly at restaurants. You will get to hear it very often when the waiter is taking the order and you have told him everything and then he finally says, ijo de yoroshi desu ka? Is this all that you want to order? And you can say, hai, daijoubu desu. Kore de daijoubu desu. So, then he will say arigatou gozaimasu and get your order. So, ijo de yoroshi desu ka? And with this, I would like to finish our class today. Lot of nandemo and nanika, nanimo, dareka, daremo, dare, daredemo we have done. Lot of sentences we have done. We have done some of it earlier as well. So, you can go look that up also. Practice this with your partner. Make sentences and answer. So, that makes it very, very easy to remember when you are doing conversation. It comes naturally. Try to do that and you will feel very comfortable. So, with this, thank you very much all of you. Mata aimashou. Arigatou gozaimasu.